40 years of mortgage and bond payments on the buildings that we have and new ones that we might construct, we have to take a long-term view in terms of where our funding streams are going to be coming from and look at alternatives to the federal government funding stream, or I should say additions, not alternatives, to the federal government funding stream to assure the long-term financial survivability so that we have sustainable models. And the move to mixed income developments, which HOC undertook several years ago, I think is one way to do this. That helps provide a cushion for maintaining the buildings that we have and making sure that we're going to be able to support the residents in a way that we can all be proud of. I would also say community engagement is something which we need to look at more of in the future. I think affordable housing is rising as a political issue at the same time that federal funding seems to be trying to go down, and that means that there's going to be a lot of need for communication with the public about what it is we do, how we do it. I've seen in my year that there is not a lot of understanding of how HOC is structured as a quasi-governmental entity and what that means in terms of how we go about what we do, when it's appropriate for the public to interact and provide feedback to us, and how we can more smoothly incorporate feedback from the public on that. So I think that's an area where going forward we would like to work with you as well.
Thank you. Doctor, this is your question to answer first, please. What are some of the factors that you take into consideration as you review and approve new affordable housing development? How can the county support HOC in creating more housing for very low-income households in its developments?
Thank you. I can tell you that the first question we always ask is, can you get more units in this building for the 0 to 30% of AMI? Literally, the staff now knows that's the first question we're going to ask for every project that they bring forward to us. And then the total amount of affordable housing within any project, given that we are doing mixed income, we want to make sure that we maintain our mission focus, that what we are building is primarily going to serve those who need the assistance. And that is something that is just top of mind and first question always. Next, we look at the other kinds of services that the population that we are designed to serve also needs. Transportation is a huge one. We serve a lot of people whose incomes are $10,000 a year or less. It's hard to own a car when that's your annual income, and so mass transit, whether it be trains, buses, subways, whatever, is a huge need. And how the development of the transportation system in the county can dovetail with what we are looking at long term is something very important. We also look at the extent to which we are deconcentrating poverty. And that's an explicit goal that we have, along with the county's diversity goal, is to look at ways that we can allow folks through the various voucher programs to move into neighborhoods that they might not have had access to otherwise. So those are the areas that I say come up over and over and over again. Are we serving those who need us most? Are we providing the auxiliary services that the population we serve also needs? And are we working to achieve the goal of deconcentration of poverty?
Thank you. Mr. Priest, same question.
In addition to the ones that Ms. Keller has mentioned, I'm going to mention a couple other things that we also look at. I know I'm always looking at the financial structure of a transaction. I want to make sure that we get the maximum return coming back to HOC and not walking out the door with the developer. That's really important that we take a look at that. It's important to do that. We also want to look at the impact of that particular project on a specific community. How's it going to affect that neighborhood, schools, transportation, and things like that are going to happen? So we're also looking at that as well. Also, long-term sustained affordability, making sure that those properties in the out years, 30, 40 years, are still going to be in that community serving that population is also another thing that we're looking at. We're also looking at making sure that there's a spatial diversity in terms of where we're locating our properties, that we are not congesting major properties in the same kind of areas. They are all over the county, and everybody is in fact benefiting from the rich investment of having mixed income housing in their neighborhoods. It's also a matter that I look at about what's called Section 3. Section 3 is a provision in federal law that provides that residents and people who benefit from our programs have access to jobs, access to training, access to the benefits that are going to happen. Can this project produce opportunities for job creation for minorities and women entrepreneurs? So we want to look at that as part of the transaction we also look to do. I'm also looking, for example, for how we look at retaining ownership of our land. I think it's really important. Long term, we've got to hold on to our land, and we have enough tools that we can do that. So I'm always going to make sure that we are not selling our land as the first way we look at a transaction, but making sure that our footprint stays in that deal as well as in that community for long term. So those are some of the things that I look at in addition to the things that Ms. Kelleher has said. Now, in terms of how can you all and us work together more effectively, one thing that we could do is find a way to streamline the entitlement process. It takes much too long from the time that you begin to get a deal put together and run it through the entitlement process, because really in this business, time is money. And when you're dealing with affordable housing, you've got to try to close that time gap as much as you can so it reduces the amount of gap financing you need to put in place to make these deals and transactions work. Also, we could look at a package of other tax incentives and other things we could do, tax abatement and other things we can do to begin to make these deals work more effectively and reduce all of our overall obligation to make these deals sustain themselves. I mean, we can always say we want more money. Everybody always wants more money. And but I think it's how you use that money and being smart about how we invest those dollars with you all is also a very important thing. I would also, there's been a lot of, not a lot, but there's been some recent legislation proposed dealing with HOC. One of the things I would certainly employ is that we look at how we continue to maintain the independent status of HOC as an organization. I think that's really very important that we work together to do that. I also think it's important that we look at how we can formulate a agenda of actions that we can take to the state for ways that they can improve the way that we operate to make the work that we do a lot more efficient and less onerous in terms of what we do. And I also think, improving communication. We've got to find more ways that we can talk other than in these kinds of hearings where we are being asked questions about, what it is and why we want to be reappointed, but instead to talk about how you know what we do, how we can work together to get that message more effectively out in the community and to the people you work with. So I think those are ways that we could work much more collaboratively with you all.
Thank you. And Mr. Creasy, this would be your first to answer. As a commissioner, how do you review HOC's capacity in areas like customer service and building management, particularly in buildings that house seniors and special populations?
Well, I have been somewhat astounded as a commissioner and having run a housing authority myself. And always, one of the things I always had chagrin about was having a board meeting, because there were always 50 residents who would come in and tell me what was going on. I'm always surprised, since I've been to HOC, about the few residents who ever come in to our board meetings to say that they're not getting adequate service. And that's really important. I think it is, to me, a reflection on the quality of the work that the staff is doing in engaging with our residents and doing the work they're supposed to do. But this is really an important area. I mean, we talk a lot about the development work that we do, but I think what's more important is the human capital work we do with our residents. And we are, in fact, have started, and we were going to conduct on a regular basis customer surveys. How do you feel about the work that we are doing? And where can we make improvements? I think that's really important to hear from our constituents who we deal with. It's also looking at our property management staff, making sure that we have the right numbers, the right type of people doing the work. One of the things that I always think is important, the first line of communication with our residents are our maintenance personnel. They're the ones who go into the units. They're the ones who go into the apartment. And if they go in with a poor customer service attitude about the residents, and I've seen that in the past, it really begins to translate in how people view what we do, the quality of work that we provide. So I think it's really important that we are constantly training our staff overall about customer service. It's amazing how people are so disrespectful sometimes to one another when they're trying to do work to improve people's quality of life. We also, as a commissioner, we want to look at issues like vacancies, accounts receivable, unit turnover. Those are measures that are used to determine whether our staff is doing the work they're supposed to do. Do we have large accounts receivable where people are not paying their rent? Are we evicting large numbers of residents? And if so, for what reasons? So we look at those metrics that have been set up as clear benchmarks to determine whether or not the staff is doing effective work. And we do that on a monthly basis through presentations that get made. I've always been a person that believes in direct engagement with residents. I was always a person on the property before the property manager was there. I haven't been able to do a lot of that as commissioner, but one of the things that I think going forward is our ability to have interface, and a lot of it gets done through our resident association. We have a very good resident association, and continue to prop them up and give them support and be present at their meeting. I think it's also very important to hear their dialogue and for giving them increased participation in the work that we do. It's really very important to do that. Also, another way, to me, is looking at the collaborations that we have with our partners in the county, the other agencies that are important to delivering the quality of services to our residents that Ms. Keller had talked about in her very first response. I mean, that is really a key point about delivering the quality of services to our residents on an ongoing basis, and especially to our special populations. We do have a number of buildings that are geared specifically just to seniors. And the buildings we don't have, we are starting to take a look at through doing our physical needs assessment on what needs to be done to retrofit some of those properties to be able to serve more accessibility for our residents. With the aging population I mentioned before, what we are seeing are more people who need to have someone living with them. And how can you do that within the confines of when you have a one-bedroom apartment for a senior? And so as we think about our plans going forward, we've got to think about how we make available accessibility and support systems for our residents in the places where they are. And more you're seeing in our senior buildings where we are providing a quality of social service support systems in the same space where the residents are living. So those are some of the metrics that I use to look at when we're looking at customer service and looking at the issue around property management. There are enough tools out there that we can measure that on an ongoing basis and know where we are.
Thank you. Doctor, the same question.
Thank you. Roy covered a lot, so I will just try to touch on a couple of things that I didn't hear him already cover. In the past decade, we have, or HOC, even prior to me, I can't take credit for what was done by far before I got here, but HOC has increased the rental housing stock by 19% and the number of households served by 23%. Those kind of growth rates in a decade definitely put pressure on issues like your customer service and your building maintenance in terms of things. In addition to the customer satisfaction survey, which is just getting into the field now, it's already been field tested and is beginning, I have specifically been pushing for performance-based contracting of all of the service providers who provide services on our behalf. Every time a contract comes before me for approval, my first question is what performance metrics are built into this contract? What data will they be required to report to us that we can use to evaluate to determine whether or not we want to continue with this vendor? We've also gone to a structure of having a only 2-year base contract with 3 optional years so that we can hold a tighter leash over the vendors that are working for us. We can decide each year whether or not to renew that option and look at the data that we have accumulated on our performance basis in order to do that. So that gives us a tool for the folks that we aren't directly employing who are providing service on our behalf. In terms of meeting the special needs of seniors and other populations, I would love to see us develop a relationship with the hospital systems serving the county so that some of their public benefit dollars could go into helping us create buildings that are more accessible for folks with special needs. Those public dollars could be contributed as capital funds so that we could have more units that are designed and built from the beginning to be accessible units. And I think that kind of a relationship, as well as the kind that we have developed at Elizabeth Square, where Holy Cross is actually going to open a clinic right on site, a primary care clinic, which will have services right there for the population that we serve. I think those are the kinds of directions that we should look to go in so that we have seamless addressing of the needs of the populations that we serve.
Thank you very much. And the final question, Doctor, will be yours first. Will you be able to continue to make the time commitment the commission requires?
Yes, I have made this my primary commitment. Some of you know I have a lot of other community activities that I participate in, but I have clearly in my time seen that the need here is such that I am willing to make this my primary commitment in terms of my contribution to the community in order to be able to meet the requirements.
And Mr. Priest, the same question.
Unequivocally, I'll have the time to be able to do this.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you to both of you. It's very clear as to why we would benefit from having you both continue with the Housing Opportunities Commission. Your thoughts about how to be innovative, especially in a time in which affordable housing is under attack at the federal level, is tremendous. I know that at our last National Association of Counties meeting that we had, we passed a resolution that asked us to really start to double down when it comes to affordable housing and making sure that we're being innovative in the approaches in which we're doing it, because we know that it is, as you said, Dr. Kelleher, a moral imperative. And Mr. Priest, you summed it up very well. Unfortunately, this president does not feel as though affordable housing should be a priority for this nation, and it should be. It really is something that we know continues to proliferate a lot of the challenges that we see in our communities. And so from that perspective, I really appreciate your out-of-the-box thinking, because that's what's going to need to happen for us to continue. We know those dollars are not going to flow, just as we see them not flowing when it comes to our environment and others that are important to us. They're not going to flow from this president. And if this president does get reelected, we will continue to have another 4 years that will be even worse than they are right now. I'm not saying that to be political. I'm saying that to be a realist. That's just not his priority. It's not a political statement. It's a fact. And so from that perspective, it will be incredibly important for us when it comes to HOC as well as our other nonprofit housing providers to make sure that we're coming up with every single kind of creative way we can to ensure that we continue our commitment to promote affordable housing. I really want to thank Councilmember Navarro for her great work on COG when it comes to our commitment to locally promoting affordable housing. It is critically important for us. And I just want to say thank you again. You came up with some great things. And as you're sitting there giving examples, the thought about what to do with our hospitals, the continued doubling down on what we need to do to build up our folks who are in affordable housing right now, and then allow them to go on. Because that's one of the things, Mr. Priest, that a lot of people don't talk about. A lot of people only talk about the fact of just being in affordable housing, but then don't talk about lifting them up out of that affordable housing model to be self-sufficient so that the next person can come in. That's the only way we're going to tackle our wait list. That's the only way that we're really going to get out of this, is by continuing to provide the services necessary and the support to get us out of this. And so I really just, the culmination of you two together is absolutely perfect. It really is, because it shines a light on what kind of thinking we need to have when it comes to addressing our affordable housing crisis. So it's really not more of a question, but more of, as in Annapolis we used to say, isn't that so?
Thank you very much. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I want to start by thanking the county executive for nominating you to continue in your role. I believe that's the way this process works, and it was a wise decision to continue seeking your service on the board, because you're both eminently qualified and have really contributed a lot to the deliberations at the board. Mr. Priest, you're a decades-long leader in affordable housing in the Washington region. There are few people in the Washington region who know about affordable housing as you do. To have you on our board is a real opportunity. And Dr. Kelleher, you're a policy expert, a finance expert. I was really connecting with your focus on contracts and how to ensure that we're getting the most out of our contracts. That's just an example of the kind of expertise that you bring to the board. So I'm glad for your nominations, and I will support you enthusiastically. And I really concur with the comments from my colleagues about, and from you, about our need to go bigger and to think bigger and to be more assertive and more aggressive in what we're doing in affordable housing. Remembering that we rely upon the private sector to create most of our housing. You know, that this is not electricity where you can regulate a company to produce what you want to produce. You actually have to have a private company that is it's incentivized to create the housing that you want. But in your case, in the case of HOC, there's a lot of, it's a little bit of a different angle, and you're able to partner with the private sector very effectively to produce housing. And what HOC has done over the last 10 years or so to build a model of public-private partnership to produce affordable housing has been absolutely outstanding. I truly believe it's one of the best examples of a public housing authority breaking new ground, being innovative, and getting results that you'll see anywhere in the country. We were the first housing authority to get funding under the federal RAD program. We were the leader. Our HOC was the leader. And I say that because you're under attack constantly, and it is distressing. It is disturbing. And there are, this is why you're a quasi-independent agency, so that you can have some, protection from those attacks. But it has been very disturbing to see over the last number of years. And as a commissioner, I know that you feel that because you have to sit in those meetings and endure that week after week. But, it just takes a couple of scurrilous people to, create a phony issue and then drag it before everybody. And then suddenly there's legislation in Annapolis. So, we have to be mindful at this council that our HOC is our agency, and we're going to work with you. If there's a problem, we're going to tackle that problem. And we're going to count on you as our commissioners to, take that seriously and listen to us and work together to address any issue that might, present itself. At the same time, we have to defend the function that you provide, because you're absolutely an essential part of our vision for achieving affordable housing. So I just want to mention as a side note, and I'll pass it on, there's been some talk about HOC conveying property that you own to other people or to other outside parties. I have not talked to any elected official anywhere who believes that you should convey any property that you own to anyone. So I just want to state that. All right, because there's requests that somehow you should have to give up property that you own to provide affordable housing on, and I do not believe that that is desirable, and I don't believe I haven't talked to anybody who agrees that would be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Priest and Dr. Kelleher. It was great meeting with you all. I guess it was last week. Time flies. I think I agree 100% with my colleagues about the qualifications and the experience and the complementary nature of your different types of experiences that you bring back to the commission, and it's a great asset. I often talk about, how great Montgomery County is, because this is a great county. We do a lot of things well. We've got a great community. We've got a lot of people, but as you know, and as you've outlined some of these challenges, not everyone is doing as well as we would like here. We have disparities. We have this long waiting list. We have increasing challenges. And I think one of the blessings and the burdens of being a leader in Montgomery County is being able to hold that duality at the same time. To say we are doing well, we have done well, we've been a model, we are one of the oldest inclusionary zoning laws in the region, we've done all the things some of my colleagues have mentioned, but still, we have many, many, many people who haven't benefited, and how do we expand that opportunity to more people? And so everything I'm going to say now and in the future is in that vein of, I recognize the great work that you've done and are doing, but that we have to do more for more people. And there's an urgency around that, that I know you both feel that we need to do that. So I wanted to just two questions. You mentioned Dr. Is it Kelleher?
Kelleher.
Keller?
Kelleher.
Got it. Okay, like it's spelled. All right,
Yes.
thank you. Dr. Kelleher, you mentioned the two things I really liked, primarily serving those who need the assistance, deconcentrating poverty, and then also both of you spoke about when I met with you, how do we, which Councilmember Rice mentioned, how do we get people to a point of self-sufficiency that they don't have to be in subsidized housing, where it can be reduced over time so that we can make room for others, realizing we don't have unlimited resources, we need more.
Right.
And I think those are very important. But also, and I think you alluded to this in your contracting, but I want you to expand on it. We have to get, this is to both of you, we have to get the best deal possible, right? And whether in any context, when you're partnering with the private sector and you're trying to have a mixed-use property and you're dealing with the terms and the deals that are out there, that's something that I'm really focused on, and I don't think there has traditionally been as much transparency around. So I'd love for you to comment on what you see the role in how we attack this housing challenge generally, but also specifically your role as a commissioner in trying to get the best deal possible.
I'll start, since I brought up the contracting to begin with. Thank you. And I think part of the complexity of our structure, which makes it difficult for people to understand what we're doing and how we're doing it, is designed to try to provide us with the flexibility and the tools that we need in order to get the best deal. And I'll give you an example. The IRS provides tax credits that are specific to affordable housing, and they give them to the state, and the state then allocates them amongst the housing agencies within the state, and they come in two flavors, 4% and 9%. The ability to have housing that is going to reach those people with the lowest incomes is much greater if you have a 9% tax credit than if you have a 4% tax credit. So figuring out how we put together the right project and the right partnership, because it's competitive across agencies and across projects within the state in order to get a 9% versus a 4%, or to get any tax credit at all, is an important factor. And putting together those kinds of deals is hard to do in a public meeting. So there are reasons that there are certain exemptions within the public meetings law for issues around land acquisition and putting together some of these partnerships so that we can have the flexibility we need to work and negotiate with different parties to try to come up with what the best arrangement is to be able to put the most money into subsidizing the cost of the rent after the building is built, as opposed to more money into the building itself. So those are examples where we work hard, and it's really the staff who works very hard first before they even bring something to us to consider or approve to make the best deal. I have to say, I have been very impressed with the brilliance of the staff that work in our real estate development and financing section. They are second to none in the country. There is no question in my mind. And when they bring us a deal to consider, they always know exactly why they are asking us to consider that deal, what options they have turned down, what the process they have been through to get there. And then we are literally the icing on the cake in terms of the people coming along asking those last few questions. Can we get any more 0 to 30% in here? Can we get a couple of more 3-bedroom units instead of 1-bedroom units, because families need 3-bedroom units, kinds of issues in there. So I really have to credit the staff for the phenomenal work they have done so far, and just point out that our complexity and the reasons why we sometimes do things or do some of our work prior to going to the public with it is for the exact purpose of being able to
Right.
work with the private sector and drive the best deal.
I appreciate you saying that. Ms. Priest, Dr. Priest.
Yeah, I want to add onto that for a moment, because I totally agree that HOC has a tremendously well-honed, experienced staff in real estate development. But with that, you need to have a strong commission where the staff and developers know that we have the expertise to look at the deal too. And that we can push back, and so we give that additional impetus to the staff's negotiation when they know, when a developer knows that they are going to come forward with a project that's going to get scrutinized, not only by staff, but by the commission. And we have been able to do that on a number of deals to totally restructure some of those deals to get us a better deal at the end with more affordable housing as well as more returns to the agency. And once that gets known in the development community, they know how to deal with us differently. And that strengthens even the staff more than they are now. So I wanted to make that point. We do that. The other thing is the fact that the resources that the state makes available through the low-income housing tax credit, with the exception of 4%, is done once a year. It's not enough money to do more than one project. And when we are confronted with a situation where we were looking at 4 and 5 transactions on our table at a time, you can't stand in that queue for 3 and 4 years waiting for tax credit money. So that's why we've got to be innovative in the way in which we use bond financing and other tools that we have. I would tell you that this county, through both HOC and the work of the Department of Housing, has one of the strongest teams about trying to look at this deal flow and how we can get more bang out of the buck than we get sometimes in the transactions that we do. But we've got to find ways to create a larger capital pool if we're going to do more transactions. Let's just be real. You've got to find a way to do that. And some of that's going to be us working together to find some really more imaginative. I mean, Montgomery County has been on the cutting edge of a lot of really great stuff around development. And we want to continue to be the leaders. We don't want to be the followers.
Thank you. And I couldn't agree with you more on a larger capital pool for affordable housing. We're going to have to address that challenge in a big way if we're going to meet our COG goals. My last question is a brief one, probably easy question. We just today had a interview for our equity officer, chief equity officer. We passed landmark legislation led by then Council President Navarro to make sure we're looking in an equitable way in everything we do across government. And obviously, housing is chief among those. There's been a practice that we discussed in our meeting, so I'm not coming out of left field here, of allowing affordable units to be put in different parts of the county from where the project has come through. So, and do you believe, and just so we're clear, that if you're agreeing to X amount of affordability, there's a way to buy down or come to an agreement, a deal, and be allowed by DHCA or others to move that to another part of the county? Do you think that's a good practice and consistent with our equity goals? If each of you could respond to that.
Let me say, no, I don't. I've always been opposed to legislation dealing with affordable housing where you allow developers to have a buyout. They can go in and put their money in instead of putting the unit in to give you some money to do other public benefits. I think you have to put the units where they need to be right there to create the kind of mixed income, strong communities that we need to have in these neighborhoods. So I don't believe when you do that. I don't think you also allow them to transfer. It's like bonus density. Why don't you take the density from this site and transfer it over here? We don't need to do that with in terms of these affordable units. We need to put them. There's a reason why we're doing these transactions in the locations geographically where we're doing them. So we should require that the developers have to put the units there and now allow them to move them somewhere else. That's just got to be done, because not what you do is you get back to the problem you're trying to avoid, which is you begin then create all of the affordable units being put in one location. That's where everybody wants to move it to that location. And that's why we have the problem we have now with segregated housing, because we have made it allow that kind of practice to go on. We can't do that. We've got to make sure that there is equity in the manner in which we look at distributing and allocating resources and locating units.
Appreciate that. I'm assuming you agree with that.
I do.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you both of you for your consideration.
Thank you. Councilmember Glaze.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dr. Kelleher, Mr. Priest, I'm glad you're here before us. I know that you've been waiting to be before us for a little while now. By my calculation, both of your vacancies expired in August of 2019, and we're now in February, mid-February. And so To me, that's too long of a lag. My understanding, there's still one more vacancy, the commissioners.
Yes.
And if we do value the work that you are doing, and trust me, we do value the work that you are doing, we need a full complement. We need to staff up and fill all the commissioners. And so I'm glad that the county executive has renominated you, but I will ask for the audience of one who's listening to please fill that other spot, because this is a really important conversation, and I want to acknowledge the other commissioners who are here, who are part of that full complement for your work. I really appreciate the conversation about the work that you're doing, particularly within the agency and the quasi-governmental function that you serve. We, in the last few months, dealing with state legislative priorities in Annapolis, and even last year, there were some state legislators who want to help improve efficiencies and help make HOC, as they view it, a stronger, better, more accountable agency. And I think what's important is within that quasi-governmental function, there absolutely is a need for oversight and responsibility, but there is also, as has been discussed, a really important need for you to autonomously do your work, free of politics, whether that politics is in the federal government, state government, or local county government. You have a charge, and we're counting on you to do it, because there are people who need homes. And the other aspect of the conversation I've enjoyed is the recognition of the holistic approach, whether it is increasing, access to health care within some of these facilities, recognizing that people between the 0 and 30% AMI can't afford a car and are reliant on public transportation. And that being said, at a time when WMATA, to digress for 10 seconds, WMATA is thinking about cutting bus routes throughout the DMV and here in Montgomery County. More of that to come outside of this session. But last thing I will say, aside from yes, I will be supporting you and look forward to continuing to work with you. Mr. Priest, your comment about the need to continue investment in affordable housing, be it capital operating, whatever it might be, however that funding comes, I'll remind folks for the record that I have a proposal out there to increase funding for affordable housing.
Amen.
And I look forward to the day when that comes to, when it works through this process, so we can have a conversation about how we tackle that, because we're still not quite sure how we tackle it. And my proposal, I think, is a fair and equitable way to do that. And so I look forward to your continued engagement in that process and your continued pushing us to do what we have to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you very much, and I really do appreciate the fact that you've decided to step up once again. I think it's clear from this interview that your extensive experience and the contributions are very much of value to our county. So I want to thank you, as well as the other commissioners who are here, and also Mr. Stacy Spann, who I think has done an extraordinary job in directing all the work. So it really is, I think, as has been said before, this commission, I think it's one that we're very proud of, and I will echo the sentiments of Councilmember Reamer, Chair of the Fed Committee, that, we will, and I think we have been on record, standing up for your independence and recognizing that we do have to continue to engage in dialogue wherever possible, but we really do appreciate your work. I appreciate also the fact that you're always willing to meet and to discuss projects that may be going on in our respective areas of the county, because there is always such interest that the residents have on what's happening in their neck of the woods, and everybody's always eager, and sometimes there's not a real clear understanding as to where the stage is, et cetera, but it's always great to be able to clarify that. And so I just wanted to go back, obviously, to the fact that the council did adopt the COG targets, and we also folded those into an economic development platform. And I know, Dr. Kelleher, we did have a conversation, and you said, that you really want to work very closely, and the commission wants to work closely with us to find out find innovative ways to do this work. Councilmember Reamer with the Fed Committee, of course, they're working on how to further this work. But I was just curious if there are any particular things that come to mind right off the bat that you think would help in our pursuit of these targets. Are there any particular special best practices or anything that you have observed that we can address? I think we're in line with many of the things that you mentioned. I think this council, both the previous and this one, has been clear on this issue of making sure we don't concentrate, any area of the county. We have worked to ensure what Councilmember Jawanda was discussing, to make sure that we're not doing that either. So there's been a lot of work in terms of planning and how do we position ourselves. Are there any other best practices that you think would be, something that we could pursue, kind of low-hanging fruit?
The one thing that comes to my mind, and this is difficult in a county that's already as built out as ours is, but I still put it out there as a model or a picture to keep in mind. Columbia, Maryland, where you have a mixture of apartments, townhouses, and single-family homes in every single village. And the main street through every village, off of it on different sides, you'll find different types of housing within that same environment. And it flows quite smoothly, actually. I lived in Columbia for 10 years, and it was a fabulous place to live, and I'm not at all surprised that it's one of the fastest growing areas of the state. And I would like to see if we can think about how do we do more of that kind of thinking within our zoning so that we can infill and that way help to deconcentrate poverty and have mixed income neighborhoods as opposed to mixed income rental buildings. And that to me would be a very interesting approach to try to take. I don't know, I'm sure it's harder than that sounds just laying it out there, but if I were to keep a picture in my mind about where it would be great to get to, that is the kind of picture I would carry around.
I would also offer that looking at new building systems. In other words, we stick built is what we usually do. There are other alternative construction techniques that are being out there now. We need to look at them as to whether or not it would require us to change any of our existing codes or whatever it may be. We need to work at how we do that. I know over 20 years ago, HUD looked at a thing called Operation Breakthrough, which is the idea of looking at creative approaches to building materials and techniques and processes for accelerating the construction of affordable housing. And there were a lot of companies that got created trying to come up with modular housing. They ended up sitting on the railroad tracks and not being used because they couldn't get through local building codes. We need to be more aggressive in how we look at the use of alternative products. I mean, we're looking at that right now with one of the systems we're using with Presence, and hopefully that will be one way to begin to embark on it. Secondly, we've got to look at architectural solutions that are a little different. We don't always have to build townhouses and single-family units. We can become multiple users in terms of triplexes and quadruplexes and other things that we can do, and that's going to require some changes in some of our requirements, but we're going to be willing to take a look at those products as well. I think the other thing is it's always, we talk about breakthrough, it's always about money. You know what I mean? If we can find creative ways to generate new capital resources that can be put back into expanding affordable housing. If we don't solve that problem, we can have all these other creative ways we want to do it if we can't find more money to pay for it. The other thing is we've got to also shorten the systems that cost you money. I mentioned, for example, the entitlement process. If we can find a way to truncate that so we can get it by a whole year, that would represent almost 15% of cost on the development. So we've got to find some of those techniques to use as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I know I'm very excited about the prospect of the work that our different committees are engaging in terms of identifying, those possibilities, mainly where is that gap. And I think that we have a really awesome opportunity to be very bold about how we do look into this different types of construction, how we look at the regulatory process, how we look at the different, designs you were discussing as well. I'm often reminded, as Dr. Kelleher was talking about the picture in your head, one of the picture in my head is how Washington, D.C. has shifted so quickly to the point that now you walk into a row building, a brownstone, and all of a sudden it has 2 condos. It has been, converted into 2 condos, and people just kind of got used to it, right? So we get really used to the single-family home structure and what it looks like to be in a townhouse, et cetera. But then sometimes markets start to really shift everything. And now it's almost as if the expectation in DC is that a brownstone is no longer just a brownstone. It's actually multi-family unit. So I'm just saying that we also need to understand that if we're going to get to that target, we may have to be innovative and not just wait for the market to just kind of push us, drag us along necessarily. So, I do think that we have some interesting opportunities, in front of us to be creative around those kinds of approaches.
It's interesting historically, if you look at some of our urban neighborhoods and communities, a lot of them got into the plight that they're in because owners took single-family units and created them into multiple units.
Right.
Okay? And they put people in those units who had the same economic profile. So what are you going to do? You're going to create the same outcome. You have more people living in the same space, but all of them with the same problem. They couldn't afford the rents. They couldn't afford to maintain the property. They couldn't keep them up. So we get into urban blight. So if we move forward with thinking about that kind of thing going forward, let's make sure we don't repeat what were some of the problems then. And a lot of the problems was not diversifying socioeconomically.
Yeah, thank you for that observation. And I'll just close by saying that sometimes when we even talk about these affordable housing targets, I've heard some people say, okay, what about the schools? And those are important considerations. But to a certain extent, I think that we also must acknowledge that there are a lot of families sharing housing that would love to be able to have an alternative. So this is not necessarily creating additional housing units so that we can grow the population. It's also about providing a dignified place to live for many families who don't have a choice in this moment in time. So there are a lot of such moving pieces, but I really do thank you, and I'm really so pleased that you've decided to step up again because we really do need your expertise there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. Thank you to both of you for your willingness to continue to serve, for all that you bring to the county, for all that you have brought and will continue to bring to the HOC. I think it speaks volumes to the talent that we have in the county. I think a lot of people have spoken already about some of the great projects and great work that HOC has done, and I think some of that is a product of the staff, as you mentioned, but much of that is a product of the commission and the commissioners, and the ability for us to tap into the tremendous skill set that you have. And Dr. Kelleher, your policy background, I think, really provides a great framework and perspective for the commission and for us. And Mr. Priest, I don't know if there's anybody else who brings your depth and the extensiveness of your housing background in over a half century of commitment to this issue, and we are tremendously fortunate that you're willing to continue to provide us with your talent, your background, and your experience. And much of my questions have already been asked, so I wanted to have the opportunity to say that. I did, speaking to a couple points that have been made, one of the things that I look forward to HOC continuing on, I just want to make a plug for this, is the fact that it's indistinguishable what is an HOC property and what is a private sector property. And that speaks volumes to the progress that we've made, not just in Montgomery County particularly, and at HOC specifically, but in the broader question of what does affordable housing look like? And the answer should be, it looks like housing. Exactly. It looks like the unit next to it. It looks like the building next to it. It is not something that is imposed upon a community. It is an asset that is part of the community, and I know that that is such an important part of the Commission's work, and it speaks volumes to the type of community that we want, and I hope that that continues, and I trust that it will continue, and by your nodding and affirmation, of that. I look forward to that commitment because I do think that that is the single most important part of the work. It's not just building the units, it's making sure that the units are the type of units that anybody would want to live in, regardless of their income level. And it just so happens that some of the units, most of the units, serve those at income levels that they otherwise wouldn't be able to access the amazing amenities that our community has to offer. I also think that it's important that, we talk about housing as a human right, and I think that's an important way to look at it, but we also need to look at housing as infrastructure. And I think that's one of the challenges at the federal level and the disastrous policies that we've had that have had an impact directly on our local housing authority and on housing across the region. And what we used to rely on our federal partners, now we have trouble being able to rely on our federal partners. But if we want to build communities, you need transportation, you need education, you need plumbing, and you need housing. And government's role in housing, while we can't do it alone, has to be part of the infrastructure to allow to have the type of communities that we want, the type of economic development that we want, the type of environmental sustainability that we want. And that doesn't happen alone. It has to happen in partnership. And I think HOC is really at the center of a lot of that work. I also appreciate you mentioned earlier, Mr. Priest, about the building materials. It's a huge challenge that we face in affordable housing. You can't talk about affordable housing unless you talk about building more housing to meet the needs of people who need it. And you can't be serious about this issue unless we're building more units. And the challenge that we have is that the units cost too much to build, particularly the type of high density that we need near transit to solve our economic, environmental, and housing needs. And so I appreciate the work that HOC has done to be a leader and a model in trying new materials that could be done cheaper, and I look forward to the work that we'll continue to do to look at what you're doing and hopefully put a spotlight on it so that it can be replicated in other projects around the community. I do appreciate Councilmember Glass's comments. I have no issue with our two nominees here. In fact, I'm excited to reappoint you and thank you for your willingness to continue to serve. But I do want to also raise the point of the open vacant seat. My understanding it's been open for almost a year now, and I don't know if Mr. Tibbetts, you're here in the back, if you wanted to come up and share with us the timing of when we could expect that, because as we've heard today with all of the comments that have been made, the questions that have been said, the commitment, we need a commission that is operating at its full capacity, and not operating at its full capacity for a year is just not something that I think can continue. So if you could share with us when we can expect that to come over, I look forward to that.
Hello, Dale Tibbetts with the County Executive's Office. We have nomination or names, and we are evaluating those, and we will get them over to you soon. I don't know that it'll be within the month. We have one issue to check out, but it is, we know about it, and we'll get it over to you as soon as possible.
I appreciate that. So I will express my ditto to the fierce urgency of now on this issue. Appreciate you following up on that, and look forward to having a very qualified colleague for the two of these that I look forward to approving, with appreciation for that and for your commitment to continue to serve. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. So my first interaction with the commission was when Mr. Spann brought to us the opportunity, when I was with the Recreation Department, to partner on the Elizabeth House project. And I saw firsthand the creativity and the dedication of the commission and the staff throughout that entire process, and was very impressed. Before that, wasn't as familiar with the Housing Opportunity Commission and its great work in our county. And so I do encourage both of you and all of the commissioners, to the degree to which you can and is reasonable, your voice is so important in this space. You are experts in this field, and you bring a perspective that we all benefit from hearing from. And so as Citizens Advisory Board meetings or other opportunities or gathering points, I encourage you to, again, within reason, participate in those community conversations, which I think will help the community better understand the incredible work of this very important body, but also lend your voices to this discussion, whether it be an economic development forum or a transportation forum, because as we all know, all these issues are connected. So just a little plug to try and go out into the community as much as possible, which I think would be helpful. And I'll just close with this. I circled, underlined, and starred the comment with regards to the connection to hospitals, Dr. Kelleher. You are absolutely right. That's a tremendous opportunity, and I want to follow up with you on that specific policy idea and recommendation, because I think there's a lot more we can do to more intentionally connect our public health space to housing. And as chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, I look forward to more formally engaging in that conversation moving forward, because I think there's some policy opportunities that are out there and funding, frankly, that we're not taking full advantage of.
I would be very happy to work with you on that. As you may know, most of my professional career was in healthcare. I've served in management of 2 hospitals, multiple insurance companies, and worked with contracting between providers and hospitals and everybody else in the world. So I'm very comfortable in that arena. I'm very happy. I know many of the players in the county who are working in healthcare systems and would be delighted to help you with that and welcome your help to us for that, quite frankly. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you so much. I thank you both for your service. Look forward to supporting your nominations. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Just to tie it all up, on the issue of alternative, more affordable construction techniques or building material types, that is indeed a huge issue. You have to be able to make a profit on private sector development, or if you can find materials that are more affordable for you to use, then your housing dollars will go a lot farther. So we're taking this up at Fed. We've got a committee meeting, I think, in early April, and I invite my colleagues to join us for that. We do have a project that HOC is involved in White Oak that is breaking new ground with advanced construction techniques. So we'll be eager to hear more about that. We want to figure out if there is a sort of a center of excellence that DPS might be able to develop to help the private sector feel confident in pursuing those kinds of approaches here in the county. I do want to join the call for requesting the executive branch to forward us a candidate for the 5th seat. We do need to complete the the membership of the commission. And the last thing I want to just say, my colleague Councilmember Friedson mentioned the concept of housing as infrastructure and our need to have adequate housing infrastructure, just as we have adequate transportation infrastructure or school construction infrastructure or water, power, wireless infrastructure. Casey Anderson has written about this. I was in a conversation the other day with a group of economic development thinkers, and Jeanette Chapman from the Fuller Institute and George Mason commented that Montgomery County has really kind of missed the boat on the millennial generation. That we did not get our regional share of millennials. We got a few, but Northern Virginia and D.C. really got the bulk of the millennial generation. And as I reflect upon why, a lot of that, I think, was housing. We just did not have enough multifamily housing available at the right time for people to move into. And the reason why we did not have that housing is because we've spent decades in a slow growth kind of anti-development mentality in this county. And then guess what happened? That, fighting off development for decades paid off. We didn't get enough. And guess what the reward is? We have lost the chance to get the benefit of the millennial generation and its contributions and, of course, its economic success. And that is part of our underlying economic challenge in this county. So we need to have an adequate housing supply in order to not miss these kinds of generational opportunities. And today, our housing construction is about half of its historic level. So we are perpetuating the underlying problem. The decades of slow growth anti-development worked. It's working. We're not getting the housing that we need, and we've got to turn that around. Thank you.
Thank you. We sincerely appreciate you being here. You're tentatively scheduled to be voted on for February 25th. And we thank you for being here this afternoon, and we're going to move on to public hearings. We're about 45 minutes late doing that, so thank you. We're going to start with our public hearings. Please hand in your copies of your testimony to the clerk seated at the podium upon entering the room. Substitute speakers, please advise the clerk if you are a substitute speaker for your organization. Speakers will not be allowed to cede time to another speaker. When you begin, before beginning your presentation, please touch the red button at the base of the microphone. When you finish speaking, please cut your microphone off. When you begin your presentation, please state your name clearly for the record. Can I ask? Please state your name clearly for the record. You have 3 minutes to speak. A yellow light in front of you will come on when you have 30 seconds left in which to finish your presentation. Please end your statement when the red light comes on. If you've not finished your statement, the council will read your submitted written testimony and will consider it just as your oral testimony. The first public hearing, and I'm going to ask for Dinesh Patel from the County Executive and Montgomery County Police to please come forward. Steve Silverman as an individual, and Peter Gray from the Washington Area Bicycle Association to please come forward. This is a public hearing on Bill 22-20, Bicycles Registration Amendments. This bill would permit voluntary registration of a bicycle owned by a county resident for personal use, require the registration of a bicycle provided for rent in the county, repeal the authority to impound an unregistered bicycle owned by a county resident for personal use, repeal the authority to deposit the proceeds from the sale of an impounded or abandoned bicycle in the Police Relief and Retirement Fund, and generally amend the laws governing the use of the bicycle in the county. A Public Safety Committee work session is tentatively scheduled for Monday, March 9th. And if people wishing to submit additional material, please do so before the close of business March 3rd. Your reviews can be included in the material, which will staff will prepare for the committee's consideration. And with that, please, Acting Chief.
Good afternoon. Dinesh Patel, Acting Assistant Chief of Police for the Management Services Bureau for the County Police. I'm here today representing County Executive Elrich and Chief Marcus Jones, the Montgomery County Police Department, to show our support for legislation 2-20 bicycles and registration amendments. The bicycle registration program, as it stands today, is not utilized as the initial legislation intended. Bicycles are registered online in our records section at no cost to the public, yet a very small fraction of bicycle owners register their bikes. Currently, all bikes are required to be registered. The main benefit of registering bikes is to have a means of locating a lost or stolen bike. Registration stickers allow for our staff to locate bikes if stolen or lost. If the sticker is removed, our staff can track by owner name or bike serial number. In years past, Montgomery County Police impounded hundreds of bikes at our vehicle recovery section which were stolen or abandoned. Obviously, the compliance rate with the existing law is extremely poor. I've been advised that over the years that there have been just a few bikes impounded for the reason that they were not registered. This bill eliminates the requirement of owners to register their bikes for personal use, leaving it optional to do so. Rental bikes would still be required to be registered. We support this part of the registration due to this growing industry and the method of use. This will be beneficial to operating procedures to contact owners of these bikes. Please note that the Police Relief and Retirement Fund referenced in the current law has not existed for many years. We researched the reference fund for the past 20 years and its existence is unknown. I appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you very much. Mr. Silverman.
My name is Steve Silverman. I'm a Silver Spring resident, and you all know me as the guy who got a criminal citation for riding my bicycle without a county registration sticker. Like you, I was astonished to learn that Montgomery County Police have the power to charge people with this unusual crime. I'm grateful for the council's swift response, and SB 20 is a crucial first step towards preventing similar abuses. When I researched the law, I learned that because of a fundamental quirk in the Montgomery County Code, police could criminally charge and arrest people for a variety of behaviors and non-behaviors that should never be punishable with more than a civil violation. The county code contains 3 classes of violations: Class A, Class B, and Class C. Class A violations allow for the most severe penalties. descending to the lowest Class C violations, which are punishable by a maximum of a $50 fine for a first offense. My bicycle registration violation, for example, is a Class C violation. Under County Code Sections 118 and 119, law enforcement officers may write up a Class A through C violation as a civil citation. But officers may also write up these violations as misdemeanor crimes. That can include an arrest, or as with my case, officers can issue a criminal citation without making an arrest, but I later received a county notice to appear for trial or face up to 10 days in jail. Councilmember Jawando says that every arrest is a policy failure. I agree. And if the council wants to further reduce the issuance of unnecessary retaliatory criminal citations, arrests and citations, you can undertake revisions to Sections 118 and Sections 119 of the Montgomery County Code. And the revisions can do one or a combination of the following. One, you could remove law enforcement discretion to issue criminal citations for one or more offenses punishable by a Class A through C violation. Or you could opt to remove law enforcement discretion to issue criminal citations for one or more entire classes of A, B, or C offenses. Again, I appreciate the council's swift response to the bicycle registration law, and I urge you to see it as the beginning of a conversation to limit the use of police use of criminal citations in Montgomery County. This initiative will restore people's trust in the law and in the people who enforce and make the law. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Gray.
Good afternoon, rather. I'm Peter Graham, representing the Washington Area Bicyclist Association. I'm here to testify in support of Bill 220 regarding bike registration in the county. For 25 years, unbeknownst to almost all bicycle owners in the county, it has been a requirement to register all individually owned bikes with the police department. Bike registration serves no traffic safety or accountability purpose. In theory, bike registration is a tool to aid law enforcement in returning stolen property to its owner, but when the police recover one or more bikes they suspect are stolen, they can check the serial number against a national registry. Most of them now are hosted online. If the bike is registered and the contact information is up to date, an owner may get their bike back, but successes are rare in this area. Encouraging voluntary registration is a fine idea. Some jurisdictions even incentivize it with giving away a free bike lock. But mandatory registration creates too many problems without sufficient benefits. Unknown rules encourage selective enforcement. The laws, in fact, allowed county police to threaten to cite and impound Mr. Silverman's bike when they did not approve of his unrelated behavior as a cyclist. And for this reason, Washington, D.C. removed a similar mandatory requirement back in 2008. Another issue that should be considered is the cost of administering such a registration program. There are millions of bikes in the county. Well, there are potentially hundreds of thousands of bikes in the county, and it would take a lot to register all of those bikes. Finally, there's a worry that mandatory registration will disincent county residents from riding their bikes. A major factor in cyclist safety is the number of bicyclists on the road and the expectation of seeing someone biking. Thus, requirements that dissuade law-abiding county residents from riding their bikes have the opposite effect to make cycling less safe. Moreover, requiring bike owners to register their bikes can lead to over-policing and discriminatory policing that could have a harmful effect on certain groups and individuals. For all these reasons, we support Bill 220 and are pleased to see that the county council is moving forward to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Council President, and thank you very much for your testimony. My questions are for Assistant Chief Patil. Have we returned a bicycle that's been registered to an owner that's had it stolen?
I can't sit here and factually tell you, like, within the last X number of years. I don't have the research on that. I will tell you that, generally speaking, the participation in the program is very, very low. To this gentleman's point, I think there are different ways you can make those connections if the bike is stolen, a serial number is reported to the police as part of a theft report. That serial number will be entered into National Crime Information Computer, and we can check there. So I don't have any personal knowledge of any recent history where that's been done, and mainly because of the very, very low participation.
I can tell you as a person who has 4 bikes in his garage right now, none of them are registered, so I'm afoul of the law, so I guess I'm a scofflaw. It's not the first time I've heard that term. It's very interesting because I actually had a bike that was stolen from my previous residence, and it was not registered, and did have the serial number, but I think it would be helpful. And so while I'm a co-sponsor of this bill and think that we need to eliminate mandatory, I think that we also need to do an education campaign around the benefits of having something like this that gives our police a tool to recover stolen property if possible. Of course, again, voluntary, and we have to make it convenient for folks. So I'm not sure if there's an online portal as to how you would register a bike. Is that how it's currently done?
Yes, I think if you look at the issue beyond bicycles, but really from a crime prevention standpoint of many valuables, whether it be a computer or maybe a television, and when you get it, you log that serial number, make and model, right? We try to encourage people to do this in our crime prevention outreach that we do. If we go to a burglary scene, it's one of the first questions that we'll ask if we have that information, because a great deal of this property can either be sold through online means, whether it's Facebook Marketplace or different things, or through pawn shops. Pawn shops still exist. They have a duty to report, and that information is there. So I think if you take it beyond the bicycle realm, I think there's an opportunity for us to look at technology, look how we can serve the public, and bring this information together in a way that respects privacy, but at the same time be able to be a resource if something does happen, say, hey, we have that information.
And I think even with our vendors, there's potential for us to be great partners in terms of making sure that our vendors are letting people know about the benefits of doing something like this, in that you can register very easily. We need to make sure it's seamless from that perspective, and then be able to get something back if it was stolen. I think all those things are, so partnering with our chambers of commerce to work with our local businesses that sell bicycles to really encourage them to get folks to do it. Again, not mandatory, but I do see the benefits of having that information that's there. We are, as you said, in a very in an age in which things are easily saleable, and so having certainly things that are out there to be able to track, even for individuals that are buying, and could check against and just make sure that that item's not stolen, that they're buying from someone, would be a benefit too. I think that would provide comfort in knowing that they're not helping a criminal to financially gain as a result of their crime. So I think that there's a lot of potential that's there if we tweak the program the right way. So thank you very much for those answers. Appreciate it. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank you all for your testimony. I particularly want to thank Mr. Silverman for bringing this to our attention. The first bicycle was created in 1817, but through modern technology, you have helped us come out of the Stone Age in terms of our thinking because of the digital media that you help provide, capturing the problems with this antiquated law. We have this legislation today. So thank you for your cell phone usage. Thank you for your social media usage. And I'm proud to be an original sponsor of this bill.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. You making me think back to my red Schwinn that was stolen when I was 18, and so the voluntary registration point is maybe that could have been helpful. But in all seriousness, Mr. Silverman, thank you for bringing this forward and putting it out there, and I'm glad we were able to move forward. I did want to ask a question. This context of your case, you were recording something that you thought needed to be recorded. You were being an active citizen. You saw someone that was having interaction with law enforcement. You recorded something, and then down the street were stopped by officers, and that this was used in that interaction. Is that correct?
Mostly. When the first interaction with the young man, I literally didn't even start recording. I sort of just held my phone out from across the street, sort of gesturing that I was about to. But they ended the detention before that, and then I sort of slowly, walked over to the young man and handed him some Know Your Rights information, I asked, I said, was that a voluntary detention? Did you want to be talking to the officers? And he said, oh, hell no. And I said, well, I know that's really stressful, but here's some information. I've got, my website, flexyourights.org. You can find our YouTube videos. Good luck to you. He didn't really seem too interested in talking to me. And then I went on my way, not cutting directly in front of the officers who I know saw me, but took a different route. But it wasn't quite divergent enough. And
that's when
they got
interaction
me.
happened.
Yeah, and
Okay,
then the
that's
interaction started.
And this question is for Assistant Chief Patel. The sections 118 and 119 of the code that were mentioned that give the discretion to do Class A through C violations or write-ups as misdemeanor crimes, do you have, and this might you have to get back to me, do you have any idea of the rationale behind that discretion and how that's generally used in these cases or others?
So I'll start by saying, I'll have to research and get back to you in specificity to those particular sections. I'll tell you just from my experience as a police officer for 26 years, it's been a while since I've written a criminal or civil citation. I'll be the first one to say, but the beauty of police officer discretion is the idea is that you can look at each situation individually and then and supposed to use good thought to decide, okay, what's the best solution. That's always been the way I kind of understood it, is that maybe you have somebody who's a repeated problem, a repeat offender for a particular type of low-level issue. Well, maybe you started with a civil citation, and then after a period of time, like, hey, it's not working. You have to step things up. But so I think the idea of discretion is to give police officers tools to be able to apply the right measure to the situation. But I can't speak specifically without research to those particular sections. But I'd be happy to.
I appreciate that, and I think it's one of those double-edged swords, and why I've talked with you all before about positive incentives and trying to de-escalate, because it could be used both ways. By some in a positive encounter, it could be used as a way to have more discretion so that you can have a lower level offense, but as opposed to a mandatory minimum, for example, where judges have to apply something despite circumstances. But on the converse, it could be used, and I don't know, I wasn't there, I don't know exactly what happened, but it could also be used to initiate and interact. And if we're tracking arrests and traffic tickets and citations as performance, you could create some perverse incentives. So I just look forward to working with you all even more on the development of as we look into those numbers and look into these types of laws. So I appreciate.
Sure, I think it's worth a review. The only thing I would add is that if you take discretion away, and the traffic ticket is a great example, or the traffic stop's a great example. If you take warnings away, I assure you the public won't be happy, because the alternative then becomes everybody gets a citation. And there are a lot of interactions that we have where a conversation, a traffic stop, bringing awareness to an issue can also change behavior. So there's a lot of discussion.
I agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are no further questions of the panel. We thank you for being here. We're going to go to our next public hearing, and this is a public hearing on 320, boards, commissions, and boards, committees, and commissions, compensation, reimbursement, and stipends. This bill would define terms related to boards, committees, and commissions, permit a public member of a board, committee, or commission to apply for an annual stipend in lieu of reimbursement, alter provisions related to the compensation and reimbursement of members of certain boards, committees, and commissions, and generally amend the law related to boards, committees, and commissions. A Government Operations Committee work session is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, March 26th, and I'm going to invite the three people from this panel: Dale Tippett from the County Executive's Office, Bruce Goldenson, who's testifying as an individual, and Jeffrey Rubin from Jews United for Justice. Mr. Tippett, you were first, please.
Good afternoon, Council President Katz and members of the Council. I'm Dale Tibbetts, Special Assistant to County Executive Mark Elridge, testifying on his behalf. There are 88 boards, committees, and commissions, BCCs, with approximately 900 voluntary public members who would be eligible to receive $1,200 per year under this bill. That could total $1 million per year if everyone who was eligible took advantage of the stipend option. Under current law, members of BCCs may already be reimbursed for transportation and dependent care upon request. A BCC member does not need to submit a actual mileage or a receipt. We pay a flat $10 for transportation and $30 for dependent care. We spend about $25,000 on this activity from an NDA. The notices announcing BCC vacancies state that transportation and dependent care reimbursement is available. There is always more outreach that can be done to inform and encourage people to take the reimbursement if it is the obstacle between serving or not. Montgomery County is blessed with incredible volunteers who freely give of their time and talent. We rely upon volunteer BCC members to advise the executive and the council because they are in the community. The executive appreciates the good intention of this bill. Because of the change to the nature of the volunteer BCC system and because the fiscal impact could be as much as $1 million, the executive opposes the bill. The executive will include an increase in the transportation and dependent care reimbursement amounts in his forthcoming operating budget since the rates have not changed since 2005. An inequity was revealed during research of the bill's effect. We have some BCCs that require a low-income person, yet we do not provide compensation beyond transportation and dependent care. We will work with you in order to redress that. We have an additional concern. $600 is a threshold for issuing an IRS Form 1099. To issue a 1099, a person must register with our CVRS vendor system with their Social Security number. That may have a chilling effect on participation, most likely in immigrant communities which are underrepresented on BCCs. To be fiscally accountable, strict adherence to attendance policy would need to be enforced. Our BCC liaisons work with members having attendance issues. BCCs have different meeting schedules, and
Thank
you can
very
see
much.
the rest of
We
my
will read
testimony.
the rest of your testimony. Thank you. Next is Mr. Goldenson.
Mr. President, members of the council, I am here today, yes, as an individual, but as former co-chair with Odessa Shannon of the county's CERB Committee, Committee Evaluation and Review Board, which published its final report in September of 2013. I note that date, it's 7 years ago, six and a half years ago. We reviewed the operations of every single board and commission that this county has. At that point, it was 90, 4 of which we couldn't really touch: Suburban Sanitary Commission, Planning Board, et cetera. You can understand that. But we went to meetings of every single one of those boards and commissions. Personally, I went to 48 of the 86. We wanted to know what did these people really do and what kind of people were there and doing the work for the county. An amazing activity. They are all concerned about overspending money. When the CERB was in operation, part of our problem was the charge that we were spending, the county was spending millions of dollars operating these boards and commissions. And was that too much? Turns out we weren't spending nearly that much. It was down into the hundreds of thousands, not millions of dollars. But one of the things we found where people were trying to save the county money was not applying for reimbursement for their travel expenses or dependent care. That was personal decisions. They did not want to do that. Many of you may know I am a member of the Board of Appeals, and our board members do in fact apply for reimbursement for mileage or for the transportation. That's our choice. But many of these people, of the 900 that Mr. Tibbetts mentioned, simply do not put that request in. It's available. They can get it. There's no qualms. There's no back talk about it. It's always there. This bill will solve that question officially, but I don't really think the bill is necessary. The CERB report covered the operations of all boards and commissions, who's compensated, who's not. If the newer members of the council have never seen that report, I suggest you read it, look at it. There's an executive summary up front. There are 90 some odd pages of what goes on. In fact, I noted the page here for the Housing Opportunities Commission about their membership and who's compensated and so forth. Last item, and I must get this in the final 20 seconds. The entire boards and commission operation is in the executive department. It is staffed by one person. It used to be two with some supplemental support. Connie Latham retired. It's now one person. You cannot have good access to all these people with one person.
We will read the rest of your testimony. Thank you. Mr. Rubin.
My name is Jeffrey Rubin. I've been a resident of Montgomery County since 1986, and am currently co-chair of the Jews United for Justice Economic Justice Team in Maryland. On behalf of JFJ, I provide this testimony in favor of Bill 3-20. Our support for the legislation is based on Jewish values that uphold the worth of every individual and the idea that everyone should have an opportunity to express their point of view on matters that impact them. By providing a stipend to a member of the public who serves on a county board, committee, or commission, Bill 3-20 adheres to these principles. Defraying the cost of child care, travel, and other expenses associated with such service would make it possible for more people to participate on these bodies. This would increase the opportunity for all the affected communities to have a voice at the table. By expanding the breadth of input, the decisions made by these panels would likely be graced with greater wisdom and meet with wider acceptance. A couple of suggestions. I think it would make sense to include a COLA provision in the bill and gauge whether the proposed stipend is sufficient to meet the intended goal of defraying the cost of participation in this public service for those who indeed need it. We thank Councilmember Rice for his leadership on this issue and urge the entire council to support Bill 3-20. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm going to be brief because I know that we have a work session on the bill, but just wanted to understand. So, Mr. Tibbetts, in response to the bill's introduction, the county executive now believes that he needs to change the reimbursement rates, but I didn't hear anything about distance. And so one of my concerns has been, since we introduced this bill, that we create an automatic inequity by having a flat cap. Because what happens is folks that are in the up county, folks that are in western parts of the county, and the eastern parts of the county, who typically have to then come to the center of the county, are automatically disadvantaged. In addition, when it comes to a dearth of child care in many of these areas, it's oftentimes more expensive than it is in more populated areas, say downtown Silver Spring, Rockville, et cetera. And so has there been any conversation about what to do when it comes to those particular issues that we talk about in our framework of racial equity and social justice?
You'll notice that we did not put the numbers in this testimony because we're still working on that, and this is the sort of kind of feedback that is helpful in order to come up with a compensation package that is equitable.
What I'd like to see, Mr. Tibbetts, then, if you could communicate to the county executive, I'd love to have the county executive work with the committee, and if there are going to be new changes that are proposed, we could actually put that in place of what we were looking to do with this bill. I think that for us, if there are worthy changes that we understand are there that are going to enable our folks to have equitable treatment who are representing us in these voluntary capacities, but for a lot of folks who are coming out of pocket, as you heard from Mr. Goldenson in terms of the CERB review. I mean, that's what we heard anecdotally from people, that they never even actually asked for it. And so there's so many people who are actually disparaging themselves and putting themselves in difficult positions because they still want to serve. And so the likelihood of them still applying for it is very minimal, but at least it'll be there if somebody really, really does need it. And I think that, again, you know, we needed to have a number out there, and I appreciate it. I actually expected it to be much higher than $1 million. So I'm actually, you know, pleasantly surprised. The reality is that if we've only been reimbursing $25,000 based on eligibility for everything that a person could apply for, the reality is our numbers aren't going to be much higher than that anyway. But I really thank you for your testimony. I really think that we can work together in terms of crafting something that will certainly be beneficial to our folks who are serving our community by bringing their voice, their expertise, and their experiences to help us shape better policy for our community. So thank you to all who testified today. Appreciate your support.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no questions of this panel, so we thank you for the rest.
One very quick question. You mentioned a work session on the subject, on the bill. When is that scheduled again?
The actual work session is scheduled for March 26th.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
I
you.
plan to be there.
The next public hearing is on a supplemental appropriation to the county government's FY20 capital budget for the Department of Housing and Community Affairs in the amount of $229,000 for affordable housing acquisition and preservation. Action is tentatively scheduled for February 25th. Persons wishing to submit additional testimony can please do so before the close of business, February 19th. There are no speakers for this public hearing. Next is a public hearing on resolution to approve declaration of no further need, road transfer agreement with the town of Poolsville, disposition of county property associated with segments of Hughes Road, Westerly Avenue, and West Willard Road. Action is tentatively scheduled for February 25th. Anyone wishing to submit additional testimony can do so by February 19th. There are no speakers for this public hearing. Next is a public hearing on a special appropriation to the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, FY20, operating budget for the Planning Department in the amount of $300,000 to expedite funding of a consultant services for the I-270 Transit Corridor Plan. Action is scheduled immediately following this hearing. We have one speaker. We have two speakers. Are you going to speak, Casey? We have two speakers, one of whom signed up is Chris Conklin, and next will be Casey Anderson. Please, Mr. Conklin.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Conklin, and I'm speaking on behalf of County Executive Mark Elrich. I'm here today to recommend that the County Council not approve the special appropriation to expedite the I-270 Corridor Transit Plan. While the County Executive believes this plan is well-intentioned, it is duplicative of other ongoing planning and project implementation activities, and the expenditure will reduce resources available to implement needed services. Since the concept of this plan was introduced, several significant developments have occurred. The MDOT Secretary has agreed in a meeting with the County Executive and T&E Committee Chair to restore the Corridor Cities Transitway in the Consolidated Transportation Plan. This reestablishes a pathway to move this project forward. MDOT has initiated a feasibility study for monorail linking the Shady Grove Metro Station to Frederick County. The Board of Public Works has endorsed revised phasing of the traffic relief plan so that higher speed and more commuter buses on I-270 are a realistic option. MDOT has initiated a managed lanes transit study that is looking at regional transit patterns on the I-270 corridor, identifying origin and destinations that could be served by express bus services, and is also looking at the park and ride suitability of the facilities in this corridor. MDOT has initiated a planning study on 355 between Maryland 27 and Clarksburg so that transit service can more effectively use this corridor. MCDOT reserved a Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Transportation and Land Use Connections grant for a short-range transit plan to serve the Corridor Cities Transitway area. Based on this work completed last year, MCDOT has developed a transit concept to serve the Great Seneca Science Corridor area and is now formalizing this plan, which includes more direct service between Shady Grove Metro and key activity centers on the west side of I-270. MCDOT has also completed planning for the 355 BRT project and is currently advancing design. 14 responses to the request for information were received late last year, indicating strong interest in working with the county to finance and implement this project. The Science Corridor service concept, combined with the 355 BRT, provides a robust mix of services for the I-270 corridor, including access to Clarksburg, Germantown, and Gaithersburg. And the executive branch has made substantial progress in developing a funding strategy to improve transit service and implementation in the county, and we plan to share that with the council in the coming months. With all of the progress over the last year, I believe our resources should be focused on implementing the projects we have already underway rather than revisiting plans completed by other agencies. Thank you for your consideration of these views.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson, please.
I think that the county executive's testimony makes the case for this project, because Mr. Conklin has outlined the many transit projects that are in some stage of planning, design, implementation, and the whole purpose of our request for this appropriation and the reason why we asked you to put it in the work program and why you put it in the work program was that nobody has ever looked at how all the things fit together. So the whole point of the exercise is to understand, how does bus rapid transit on 355, MARC rail, additional investment, perhaps a monorail, ride-on bus service, extension of the Red Line to Germantown, all of these ideas have been kicking around. Some of them are short-term possible or even being realized, as Mr. Conklin said. Some of them are perhaps pie in the sky, and nobody has ever really evaluated whether or not they should be reduced to some formal planning document. But the whole point of the project is to understand how these things fit together so they can be not just prioritized, but so they can be synthesized so they can all complement each other instead of just a bunch of different random pieces of transit projects competing for funding and attention from this body and from funding from the state government. Second thing I would say is that with all due respect to the executive branch and to SHA, no one except for this body with the work of the planning board recommending to you has the power to change the master plan of highways or other master plans that call for specific transportation infrastructure to be built. So even though there is feasibility analysis being done on various projects, if there's some modification of the CCT, the county executive does not have the authority to change the master plan alignment of the CCT. That has to come through the planning board and through the county council in order for that to be given effect. Same is true of all these other projects. There are some short-term things that can be implemented like BRT that are already approved, it's true. But again, no one can figure out how, no one has even tried to figure out how those things fit together, much less do they have the authority, legally speaking, to modify them in order so that they can be made most efficient. Third thing I want to say is that you'll recall the reason we made this request for $300,000 to get this done early is at the request of this body that wanted to accelerate work on analysis of whether the staging triggers for the Great Seneca Science Corridor master plan could be achieved. Again, that's something which is within your power with the planning board's help making recommendations and analysis to all of you about how that might be achieved. That cannot happen with the executive branch. It cannot happen in the absence of master plan work. And that's not just a legal formality. The analysis, the traffic modeling up and down this corridor is necessary as the predicate to be able to justify and understand how the staging triggers should be modified.
Thank you. And I'm going to call on a couple of council members, but just so I'm clear, the list of transportation items that you mentioned, will this $300,000 be looking at all of that?
$300,000 is to get started early on the project. It was already in the work program, but you had collectively suggested that we accelerate it. We need a little bit more money in order to get that done sooner rather than later. But yes, the answer is the scope of the project includes all those things that we just talked about, and we're working on scoping it out right now. But it's at a minimum all the big transit ideas that Mr. Conklin had mentioned, and also the ones we're all aware of, like monorail and extension of the Red Line. All those sort of things will be considered.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to append a brief note to your comment there about this is accelerating funding. My understanding from Director Wright is that the request is moving funding from FY21 to FY20. And so the FY21 budget request will be modified accordingly. But we'll go back to the origin of this. The origin of this was the council's intense concern about economic development and a recognition that the Great Seneca Science Corridor area is the heart of our biosciences sector. And yet, the wisdom of councils in the past put caps on commercial development in the heart of our bioscience sector. And the development capacity is all held. There are actually some great projects that are now starting to form in that part of the county, but they're going to use up all of the capacity that is essentially available. if we want to ask ourselves, how have we gotten to a point where our job production is so much lower than what it was decades ago in comparison to other jurisdictions in the region? Putting a hard cap on bioscience company growth at the heart of your sector geographically is a pretty good explanation of how something like that might happen. So the purpose of the master plan amendment that we, as a body, requested was to figure out how to rethink some of those restrictions that we put in place. And the request that we received from the planning staff and from the board was, we really want to do that. We want to take this on. And in fact, you know, we're going to be thinking even a little bit more outside the box than what you've asked us, but we've got to be able to figure out the transportation numbers. And the best way for us to do that is to accelerate the proposed I-270 corridors functional plan and take it up now, and we'll think through these Great Seneca pieces, and then we'll come back to you with a revised master plan amendment as we are working on a variety of different transit issues, you know, for the corridor. So what Director Conklin has described, those are all good things. Like everything will all work together in the end. But we need to move urgently to address the artificial constraints that we have put on our commercial development in this area. So, you know, I do take exception. I know the county executive opposed this master plan amendment. So, you know, I don't agree that he believes that this is all to the good. He said that he did not agree with us amending the master plan for this purpose. And I find it to be, you know, he's talking a lot lately about bio and NIH, and like he's sort of getting on the bandwagon in a way that I think is good. I'm glad he's recognizing that this is an area for us to be doing more. We need to be all working together in that spirit. But this specific master plan amendment is intended to allow our private sector to grow, and you know, there's a kind of a brick wall in the way. So I really I appreciate the list of projects that you've described. I look forward to learning more about those that are, you know, were just hinted about, or taking them up in due course. And some of them I'm aware of and have been aware of for a while. But I really think we need to stay the course here, because the effect of this, if we did not approve this amendment, the effect of that would be that the consideration of all of the zoning and capacity for the Great Seneca Science Corridor will be delayed substantially. And so that's how you go from a sense of urgency about economic development to lots of studies and then a couple years delay before you can take something up. And then in the end, you haven't moved the needle in a timely manner. So I think we need to really get out of that habit and be a little bit more aggressive here in a way that is, of course, extremely mindful of there's a lot of substantial work involved. This is not, we're not shooting from the hip. We are taking this up in a very substantive way. Glenn is available to comment if any council member needs. As you'll recall, he had a role in sort of helping formulate this concept. But I certainly urge my colleagues, you know, I appreciate the testimony from Director Conklin. I do believe we should continue forward with this supplemental appropriation.
If I could amplify one thing in response, the work the department did over the last year and is advancing now was precisely because we recognized this impending issue with the subdivision cap, or the development cap in this area, and want to make sure that we have a realistic solution that we can implement with the available resources to address that. So we're completely aware of the issues that are driving this plan, and that's why we're developing.
Thank you. I know. I hear that, but my concern is, you know, effectively, I think that the implication there is also that we'll take. Like, this is the council's master plan, and so the council's body needs to be in the driver's seat of thinking through what the analysis is in partnership with MCDOT, you know, in partnership with council staff. So I do think it's important for us to retain that role.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Giwando.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I appreciate that response. Let's partner to save $300,000. I mean, I'm frustrated by the underlying this, the lack of cooperation. If we agree that this is the problem, I mean, everything that Councilmember Reamer said, bio's important, this sector's important, you just confirmed that is driving the long list of studies, managed lanes, feasibility, monorail, the whole thing that I think we all agree we need to figure out. Then, my job is, and our job is to spend money wisely. It's already in the plan, and I'm going to let you respond too, Mr. Anderson. You're already doing it. This is just to accelerate it and have another consultant come in. And I know we've talked about use of consultant dollars in the past and how do we shift and do more with internal planning. So that's in my mind on this too. I want to get the objective done, but if we can save $300,000 and put it towards one of these mini projects, and it sounds like we're in agreement, then figure it out, planning and DOT and council. I just don't think it's acceptable to say it's our authority, so let's spend almost $500,000 to speed it up. So I just really need you to comment on that part of it, both of you, please.
But I think we should take.
Well, I should start by saying we collaborate quite a bit. I consider Chris to be a good friend, and I don't just mean a friend like we have in politics and government.
A real friend, not my friend on the other side of the aisle.
Exactly. And I've worked very hard to develop close relationships, as I know Gwen and others in planning and the Parks Department have. In fact, that's one of the things I'm proudest of in my role as chair, is I think I've established very effective working relationships across different agencies, including MCDOT and SHA. So we cooperate all the time, and nothing I've said should be taken to suggest that we're not going to cooperate closely with MCDOT. They're there at every planning department work session, on every land use plan to talk about the transportation implications. We will be joined at the hip with them. We're not going to do this on our own in opposition to DOT. I think that something Mr. Reamer said is important, though, which is the council and the planning board are the transportation planning policy bodies, not MCDOT. It's an implementing agency. They certainly have a role to play in helping us and providing insight, and we work cooperatively with them, but we are the keepers of the master plan of highways. We are the planners who actually can make the legal changes to the map that say where should the transit lines go, as well as where should the real estate be developed. Now, on the point about saving $300,000, we would be hiring consultants for this in any event, because the modeling work that's done here is not something that's available in-house.
That capacity is not available in-house. No matter when you do it, I just want to be clear.
No matter when we do it.
You would need consultant money.
We would need consultant help, and that's what we do with every master plan, whether it's a land use plan or a functional plan that relates to transportation. We would be working with consultants who specialize in this kind of very specialized kind of modeling. And again, it's to just move the project up. It's not to add to it or make it more expensive than it otherwise would be.
Mr. Conklin.
Along those lines, the concern is that so many of these other things are also in that process of modeling and evaluation by other agencies, that there's a potential for duplication or revisiting of the work if we start this at this time. In our view, it would make sense if this work occurred after some of that other work has gotten to a decision point or conclusion point in the documentation that the planning board can rely on, rather than trying to keep up with it as it's going.
So you can get some information that could be helpful and be utilized by the consultants maybe to lower that cost at some point. I understand the urgency, but that's your position. You're saying some of this is being done.
That's
that
correct.
Information
and
would be helpful.
And the chairman is right. It's not being done in a coordinated way, but it is all being done at about the same time with a similar schedule.
Okay.
If I could suggest, I don't know that we're gaining a whole lot here right now. If it meets with the chair's opinion, I'd like for this to go to, first of all, I don't know how much you all have actually discussed this between the two of you, but I'd like for this to go to Fed before we actually vote. We scheduled for an action item right after this. I don't feel that we're prepared, that we are prepared at this moment for that. If this could go to Fed as quickly as possible, if you all could have some additional conversation and then see where we are, and $300,000 is a lot of money, And if we could, to Councilmember Joando's point, if we could spend this on some of the projects rather than the study of the projects, I think we'd be helpful, though I do think we need to examine how things fit together. So if it meets with the body's opinion, favorable opinion, that's where I think we should go right now. I don't know that John, 1 second. I don't know that we should be voting on this today. Go ahead, please.
I just want to make sure that the council then understands the implication to our work program schedule. We had committed to starting the Great Seneca Science Corridor plan in June. If this decision isn't made, and through our procurement efforts, we had hoped we'd be able to put out the RFP almost immediately, because we need to get the data going to be able to move to Great Seneca Science Corridor. We will probably need to move Great Seneca Science Corridor back a couple of months, because if we don't get the approval of the money, don't get the RFP out, don't get the data that we need by June, then we have to push Great Seneca Science Corridor start date by, a few months. So it's like a domino effect.
And I appreciate that, but I also wonder if we were able to come back and have this on as an agenda item for action in 2 weeks, how much would that push back the Great Seneca Science?
I think if we can get a decision before the end of this month, that would be great. That's the critical thing, and I don't know what the Fed committee agenda is like.
And I don't either.
But I think I'm just sort of saying February is a key month for us.
Well, there is a possibility we're not going to meet next week, but we are going to meet 2 weeks after, February 25th. So to me, that would be a logical step. Councilmember.
Could I just
go ahead.
wrap up? So thank you. And at the appropriate time, I think we're in a public hearing, so we probably have to close that.
We are sort of. Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
As a member of the Fed committee, that would be great. I had one quick conversation with Director Conklin in the car 2 days ago, and I haven't really gotten a chance to speak to Casey or Gwen yet. So and knowing that is helpful, that timeline. Again, I think I speak for myself, and from what I'm hearing, I have the goal. We all have the same goal here of trying to get this done. If there can be an additional conversation that happens, and then we have it in Fed, and we can still get everything figured out, I think that would be ideal. So I appreciate that. So I'll stop my questioning then.
Go ahead, Councilmember Reamer, please.
Thanks. Here's the problem. This is funding to conduct the I-270 Corridor's Transit Master Plan Amendment. That's what this funding is to do. It is accelerating funding that we were going to provide. Is that, Director Wright?
It's accelerating funding that you would have been considering as part of our budget.
Right.
If this is approved, our budget proposal for fiscal year 21 will have $300,000 subtracted out of that budget proposal. We are essentially asking for money we were asking for in 21. We're asking to have it accelerated.
So deferring this is essentially saying, why don't you reconsider the work plan item that you have previously decided, which we would be doing because the county executive doesn't agree that we should be doing it. And I don't know what other, this is allowing them to get going on the corridor transit master plan sooner. There's a lot to be worked out, no question. What exactly the branches will do together, that's all TBD. But then the functional consequence of not proceeding with this is delay in the zoning and the land use, which we know the county executive opposes. He's already said he does not agree with this master plan amendment. So I don't understand why we would, not just keep moving forward here. This is our functional master plan amendment that we put in the work program. I don't think we need to reconsider that, whether we to do that or not. And I do think we need to do it sooner than we had previously planned in order to support the Great Seneca Corridor master plan amendment. Are there details to be worked out? Yes, absolutely.
I really think it would be helpful for council members to talk and express their view here.
Thank you, Councilmember. And there are people
Thanks.
that want to do that. Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Okay, sorry. I thought there was somebody before me. So I'm a little flat-footed here, to be candid. I think that I understand the need and the urgency, and as we've all articulated many times, economic development has to be one of the highest priorities of this council, and the fact that this is directly connected to an economic development opportunity or issue is very compelling to me. I guess I want to ask Mr. Conklin, you had mentioned in your testimony the need to do some other work and assessments, and that in your testimony you essentially implied that it was too soon, that we weren't ready for this level of analysis, and that we would benefit from having completed other projects. Can you expand on that and talk about how long that would take?
I can. Many of these are underway by the state DOT, and they started late last year when people were commenting that there wasn't enough thought to how the state's traffic relief plan could accommodate transit. So they've ramped up some of these efforts. Some of these are new developments that are related to the change in the leadership of the state DOT, where there's more openness to engaging in a conversation about transit than there may have been before. But the primary one that's related to the Shady Grove Science Corridor was started by the DOT with the support of the Council of Governments about a year ago, figuring out a short and medium range transit strategy, knowing that the CCT's implementation was much delayed. We have work going on that to try to define what the requirements and the elements and requirements of that project would be that we expect to have done this spring. But all of that's context for these things have started to move in the last 6 months. They're all at various stages of completion. This would be another planning effort that would start in that period that wouldn't have the benefit of any of those other efforts reaching a state where their findings or conclusions are documented.
I guess, Dr. Orland, if you could talk a little bit about, from your perspective, from the council staff's perspective, if you could weigh in and provide your thoughts on this, it would be helpful for me.
Okay, I'm not sure if you want to hear this or not, but here we go. I agree with the county executive and Mr. Conklin. The county's not going to be making the decision as to which these projects move forward. It's really going to be the state. We have forecasts already for the CCT. It's done. We have forecasts already for BRT North. That's done. There's a study going to be underway for monorail that will produce ridership estimates. There's a study that you've just agreed to in terms of state legislation yesterday, looking at point-to-point bus services on 270 with the possibility of direct ramps to and from 270. That hopefully will be done if that passes in Annapolis. There have been some studies in the past about MARC rail service, about providing more MARC rail services. I'm not sure how you can do a $300,000 study looking at all 5 of those things, and there's probably more that I didn't elucidate, which you'd have to look at, okay, if you build 4 and don't build 1, what's the ridership? If you build 3 and don't build 2, what's the ridership? There's so many permutations and combinations. I wouldn't know where to begin if I were doing this forecast. And you really can't tell what the land use ought to be until you really know what's coming. The Purple Line, for example, you didn't decide on the land use until the Purple Line plan was done. You then adopted a master plan for the Purple Line, which matched what the state is doing, because they're the lead on this. And then, over time, we've done master plan amendments for individual areas around the Purple Line. The same thing sort of happened, a little different, with the Intercounty Connector. We did not, as the council did not amend the master plan for the ICC until the ICC study was done and decision was made by the state. So for slightly different reasons, but I agree with the executive, it's really not going to do much good to really do a $300,000 study now when we don't really know what projects are going to emerge. We don't make the decisions ultimately on most, if not all, of these projects. I would recommend not going forward with it. And as far as economic development, I agreed with what Mr. Mr. Reamer had proposed last December, which the council sort of didn't take kindly to, which is to have a very limited master plan amendment, which would amend Stage 2 of the Great Seneca Science Corridor Plan, divided into two pieces. The first piece meeting the 3 of the 4 existing conditions in the plan, which we can very well be met by June, and the fourth one being the half construction of the CCT, which would wait for the second part of Part 2, and that way could actually get some economic development capacity available to go forward. That's in short where I stand. I think it's probably a good idea to go to the Fed committee on this and play this out a bit more, have more of a discussion. But
I did have one additional question before turning it back over to you, Mr. President. The procurement process within planning, how long? I know how long it takes in the executive branch, which can take months to get an RFP out and to actually implement the work of a consultant. And so there is a benefit to initiating that process sooner rather than later, generally. But if you could describe for me what that process looks like within planning and how long it typically takes from the time funding is appropriated before you have a contractor in place.
Sure. We, again, just to make sure the council understands, we had this item added to our work program by the council, the I-270, not Great Seneca, but I-270, last spring. And it was part of our fiscal year 20 budget. We did not have it in our budget originally, and this council added this project to our budget and to our work program. We have been spending time and staff resources thinking about how to frame and accomplish the task that you all gave us. We have done a very detailed assessment of, can we do the work in-house or do we need consultant assistance? And we have determined that we need consultant assistance. We were planning to request that consultant assistance in our fiscal year 21 budget and start that work in July if we got that budget approved. But then the issue of Great Seneca Science Corridor came up, and there was a great desire by this group, by this council, to address what is essentially a moratorium that exists in Great Seneca Science Corridor now because of the staging. And we said we can do that, but we need to think about it in the context of the I-270 functional plan. So that was why we came forward and actually discussed this when you added Great Seneca to our work program. We discussed the fact that we would need to expedite, and we talked about $300,000 at that time. And in terms of the procurement process, we've been, again, with the direction we've received from the council to date, we've been spending time putting together a scope, trying to get it ready to go out for procurement. We do have, luckily, some on-call firms that we can use rather than having potentially to do a full procurement with an RFP and so on and so forth. We're working through that. But we are hopeful that we'd be able to get someone on board once we know the money's there in, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, which is working in record time, but we are working hard because we've heard from you all that this is important and that you want us to really think about this. The only other point I'd like to make while I have a minute is just to note in Dr. Orland's comments about the Purple Line, many folks forget that the original study about the Purple Line was one done by the planning department called the Georgetown Branch Study. It was a plan that was done back in the, late 80s.
1990 was
1990. And it wasn't the detailed design of the Purple Line, but it set the concept. What we do in planning is we look at big picture, long range issues. And I think this is the same thing that Chair Anderson said, what DOT does is implement. We are thrilled that they're looking at improving bus service in the Great Seneca area, which is essentially what, we've talked about. And I think having more bus service in the Great Seneca area as an interim move is an excellent implementation strategy. But it doesn't solve the big picture of how people are going to get from Frederick through Montgomery County to Tysons in a transit-oriented way and an efficient way. This is a big idea. It's not a set of small ideas. So we think, again, although we did not conceive of this project, you all did, that we think it's actually a very important project, and it's something that we should be thinking about. And again, it's a big project, not a series of little ones.
Okay.
I guess, how long could, as we're waiting here, as we're looking at the committee structure, if we discuss this within, is it possible or feasible to talk about this within 2 weeks in Fed? Because I do think it would not be unreasonable for us to have an expanded discussion if we can do it quickly. If this is going to take too long, then I don't believe paralysis by analysis is where we want to go. So I guess I just would ask the committee chair.
Next week is one problem.
You got to cut on your mic.
Well, a practical problem is we have recess next week. We could potentially take it up on Thursday of this week, after a long series of discussions about the CIP. But realistically, we could take it up the week of the 24th.
On the 24th, so that you could be on the...
Well, to be on the calendar at the council on the 25th.
Yeah.
We could do like a late afternoon session on the 24th, Monday the 24th. Be a little painful for us at Fed, but we'll take one for the team.
We'll provide coffee.
Yeah, exactly. We have Fed at 2 on Monday the 24th. So I'm more than willing to take it to Fed and on the 24th, and we'll hear more from the team about the value add here and the connection to the land use function that we control, and bring it to the council on the 25th if the council president is willing to put on the agenda on the 25th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councilmember Rice.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think it should go to committee.
Go to committee, is that what you just said? Okay, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I don't think this is a discussion for a public hearing. So I think, while I don't have concerns necessarily, I think there are some issues that have been raised that need to be fleshed out and clarified, and I agree that I'll take those up at committee.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Yeah, I appreciate the chair's indulgence. I think it is important for the committee to have the full conversation. It is true, Ms. Wright, that we did approve this, but at the same time, when we get the executive saying that they can find the money elsewhere, and then we have all these committee sessions talking about all the outstanding need, and we're trying to be restrained in terms of all this, outstanding need, it should at least have a conversation in committee before us, having to balance all of this in our heads during public hearings. So I appreciate the chair's indulgence in taking it to committee and look forward to that deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, this concludes this public hearing. And please make a note that this hopefully will be on the agenda and certainly approved to be on the agenda for February 25th. After the going to the Fed committee. The next public hearing that we have is on a supplemental appropriation to the county's government capital budget, an amendment to the FY19 through 24 capital improvements program for the Department of Transportation in the amount of $2,340,000 for Davis Mill Road emergency stabilization. There are no speakers for this public hearing, and action is immediately scheduled. Is there a motion? So moved. It's been moved by Councilmember Navarro. Is there a second? Second. It's been seconded by Councilmember Rice. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And it is unanimous by those present. Thank you very much. Moving right along. Next is action item number 12. This is a public hearing on supplemental appropriation to the county government's FY20 capital budget for the Department of Transportation in the amount of $405,000 for Fenton Street Cycle Track. There are no speakers for this public hearing. The public hearing is now closed. Is there a motion? It has been moved by Councilmember Navarro and seconded by Councilmember Friedson. All those in favor, please raise their hand. It is carried unanimously by those present. Next is the public hearing on a supplemental appropriation to the county government FY20 capital budget for the Department of Transportation in the amount of $100,000 for bikeway program minor projects. There are no speakers for the public hearing. The public hearing is now closed. Action, is there a motion for this motion? So moved by Councilmember Jawando, seconded by Councilmember Navarro. All those in favor, please do so by raising your hand. Those opposed, same sign, and it carries unanimously by those present. The next public hearing, I was going to say last, but we got one after this. The next public hearing is on a supplemental appropriation to the county government's FY20 capital budget for the Department of Transportation in the amount of $367,000 for bicycle pedestrian priority BIPA improvements, Wheaton Central Business District. There are no speakers for the public hearing. And the public hearing is now closed. Is there a motion? So moved. It has been moved by Councilmember Navarro, seconded by Councilmember Reamer. All those, Jawando, excuse me, I knew it was over there. Okay, Councilmember Jawando. All those in favor, please do so by raising your hand. It is those opposed, carries unanimously by those present. And the final public hearing, and this is a public hearing on a supplemental appropriation to the county government FY20 capital budget for the Department of Transportation in the amount of $84,000 for BIPA improvements. Beers Mill Road, Randolph Road. Action, there's no speakers for the public hearing. The public hearing is now closed. What is the pleasure of the council? It's been moved by Councilmember yes, Albernaz, seconded by Councilmember Navarro. I'm gun shy now. Councilmember Navarro is seconded. All those in favor, please do so by raising your hand. Those opposed, same sign, and it carries unanimously by those present. The next item that we have is that we're going to need a motion for a proposed closed session is to discuss employment, assignment, promotion, discipline, demotion, compensation, removal, resignation, or performance evaluation of an appointee, employee, or official over whom it is jurisdiction pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions, Article 3-305, subsection B1I. The topic is interviews for the position of Council Deputy Director. Is there a motion? It's been moved by Councilmember Friedson, seconded by Councilmember Navarro. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed, same sign. It carries unanimously by those present. Thank you very much. We are adjourned to go to a closed session.